Ladies and gentlemen, Garfield and friends.
We're ready to party!
We're ready to party, we're ready.
I hope you bring lots of spaghetti.
I'm scared. Come on in, come to the place where fun never ends. Come on in, it's time to party with Garfield and friends. Dancing,
Fiesta!
romancing,
Siesta!
samba,
La Bamba! Ay caramba! Disguises!
disguises,
Surprises!
surprises,
And pies of
pies of
all sizes!
Come on in, come to the place where fun never ends. Come on in, it's time to party with Garfield and friends. Come on in, it's time to party with Garfield and friends. Garfield and friends.
Change channels and you'll never see your dog again.
What exactly was the animation renaissance of the 1990s? A lot of different people have a lot of different answers to that question, depending on how you look at it. For myself, I see the Renaissance as the time when animation was made for the sake of animation. See, Western animation in the 80s was largely made for the sake of marketing toys and merchandise, brought about when the Federal Communications Commission ended restrictions on what qualified as a commercial and what qualified as an entertainment program back in 1983, which resulted in various networks getting flooded with shows like He-Man, Transformers, Thundercats, and all sorts of thinly veiled toy advertisements. Think of it as the puppy syndrome. Studios get this new puppy and they play with it all the time because, well, it's a puppy, and it's cute, and it's awesome. And, well, that's kind of sad, because around that same time, animation was becoming sophisticated enough that fun, big concept cartoons were much more doable, and we were able to step away from the super cheap fare of the 70s brought by studios like Hanna-Barbera. I mean, look at some of the concepts of the shows I just mentioned. On a distant planet controlled by a techno-magic society, a character that's a mix between Conan the Barbarian and Marvel Comics' Thor is entrusted with protecting an ancient magical power source from a maniacal overlord of evil with a skull for a face. Warring clans of transforming robots spill onto Earth in search of rare power sources by turning into cars, weapons, and dinosaurs. Extraterrestrial humanoid aliens with cat-like characteristics flee their dying planet and settle on another, only to discover that's the home of a mummified sorcerer who teams up with a band of mutants to steal one of the aliens' religious artifacts. This is all high-concept stuff, and I love high-concept stuff. It's just too bad that it all happened during a time when studios were more concerned about their show's marketing and recycling animation to save as many pennies as possible. I think it's telling that He-Man, Transformers, and Thundercats all got newer shows that did a far better job taking these high concepts and actually doing some decent storytelling with them. Thankfully, the puppy syndrome was still in effect, and everyone eventually gets tired with the puppy and stops playing with it, so animation moved on, which brings us to the 90s Renaissance. I mean, first you got Warner Brothers, who, with the help of Steven Spielberg, brought us shows like Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, and Freakazoid. Shows with super high quality animation that took classic Looney Tunes sensibilities and repackaged them for modern audiences. On the other side of their studio, they created Batman the Animated Series, which many have argued as the definitive version of the character, which kicked off the expansive and very well liked DC Universe series of cartoons. Fox also took a stab at superheroes around this time, with the pretty good X-Men series and the admirable but ultimately not so great Spider-Man cartoon. Though incidentally, without the funds to buy comic books at the time, it was my primary source of the character for most of my young life. Fox did knock one superhero cartoon out of the park with the hilarious Tick, though the rest of their lineup was full of pretty good off-the-wall kid comedies like Bobby's World and Eek the Cat. Oh, and there was something called The Simpsons. And then we had Disney, who on top of having their own renaissance with animated feature films and bringing us Pixar, crafted Disney Afternoon, a program block that presented classic Disney characters in modern animation with shows like DuckTales, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, Goof Troop, and Tailspin, as well as occasionally throwing us something like Gargoyles. On the cable side of things, Nickelodeon was experimenting with a lot of different studios for their very varied and fun Nicktoons lineup, while Cartoon Network kicked off, giving a home for classic Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry, and Scooby-Doo, as well as eventually kicking off their own lineup with awesome and irreverent shows like Dexter's Laboratory, the Powerpuff Girls, and Johnny Bravo. We also saw the beginning of CGI cartoons with Reboot, and eventually Transformers Beast Wars, which, incidentally, was when the Transformers franchise finally got good. So yeah, a lot of original content. And while all these shows had merchandise, that wasn't the end goal of any of them. They were there to either be good stories or really funny cartoons. It was a great time to be an animation fan. But of course, this kind of change doesn't just happen overnight. Which brings us to the transitionary period that slowly crept in the last couple of years of the 1980s. The flagship for the transitionary period, at least for my money, was the 1987 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon, which is kind of a best of both worlds. Yes, it was greenlit because the producers saw it as a great marketing possibility, and you couldn't take two steps without bumping into a Ninja Turtles action figure, but at the same time there was a much larger focus on character. The first season had a legit story arc, and the animation wasn't just the same recycled frames over and over again. Add to the fact that it was the first legit stab at a comic book property since Hanna-Barbera made surprise butt sex with the Fantastic Four, and you could probably draw a line of influence from Ninja Turtles to Warner Brothers' Batman and Fox's X-Men and Spider-Man. I mean, sure, Ninja Turtles was goofier than any of those shows, but it was definitely a step in the right direction for Saturday morning animation as legit storytelling. So if Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was an ancestor to Batman, what would be considered the transitionary period ancestor to the other side of Warner Bros. Animation, the Tiny Toons Animaniacs side of things? All of this being a really roundabout way of saying I'm here to talk about Garfield and Friends. You've probably heard of Garfield, the comic strip cat that nobody likes anymore because the panels and jokes are all copied and pasted. Now this might be hard to recall, especially if you're younger, but there actually was a time when Garfield and its creator Jim Davis were funny. It was oh so long ago, but there was a time when Garfield had more than 3 jokes, when things actually happened in the panels, when there were comic-to-comic story arcs, and occasionally it even got weird and dark and took risks. In the 80s, the series of Peanuts animated specials had really run out of steam, and it seemed only logical to finally pass the torch to a new comic strip. So Peanuts animator Bill Melendez and producer Lee Mendelson started a line of Garfield specials with almost violent regularity, releasing 9 of them between 1982 and 1988. These specials set the groundwork for Garfield and Friends, including establishing the late Lorenzo Music as the voice of Garfield. Taking that and springing off the comic strip during what I believe was its funniest period, the show was a funny, ridiculous comedy with a lot of kinetic energy, fourth wall breaking, and jokes both subtle and in your face. It was rough around the edges. The animation wasn't exactly stellar, even for a time when it wasn't uncommon to see hairs on the frames, but it still worked really well, and its format and humor lay things out for future comedy cartoons to pick up from. I really liked this show as a kid, and even now it's something I can put on if I want to blow 20 minutes and enjoy myself. Now, this is one of those commissions where I get to choose the episode, but the thing about this series is that, well, none of the episodes really stick out. As much as I watched this as a kid and occasionally watch it now, there's no ultimate best episode of Garfield and Friends, and I asked people who also love the show if they could think of one. So instead, I decided to use a random number generator to select an episode to review at random, and thus I'll be looking at Season 3, Episode 13, Clean Sweep, which turned out to be an apt choice, as the 3 animated sketches show us the show doing what it does well, doing something new, and doing something not that good in that order. So let's start off with the first segment, Clean Sweep. The segment opens with Odie running from something he's clearly terrified of, but it turns out he just needs a bath. Yeah, my dog's like this, except he's a German Shepherd, so when I get him under the hose, he proceeds to destroy me. Of course, Garfield takes an unnatural level of glee from Odie's misery.
Odie, you are going to get a bath, whether you like it or not.
This is better than television.
Now, this is a comedy, and comedy is subjective, and thus hard to review. It basically boils down to, I think this is funny, or I don't think this is funny, and proceeding to bore your audience. Hopefully I can avoid this with analysis. Now, the reason I think the humor often works in Garfield during this time period was that the world in which these events take place in is just the right amount of askew from the real world. The Garfield segments weren't the kind of cartoons that would constantly break the laws of physics or drop anvils on heads and things like that. Its humor came from the slight absurdity of a cat pushing a chair into a kitchen to watch a dog take a bath. Another thing the show often commented on was the rise of home conveniences, like TVs becoming smaller and more affordable by presenting eyeglasses with TVs on the lenses, or in this case, a robotic dog washer to make John's life a little easier by making the process a lot more complicated. Yeah, that was pretty much the 90s in a nutshell. It works using a collar that detects dirt, which Garfield uses to torture Odie with bath after bath after bath, only for the tables to be turned when Odie manages to get the collar on Garfield. This actually brings the two of them together, and in a rare moment of bonding between these two, they both gang up on John and make him feel what it's like to have a bath. Short summary? Well, damn it, the cartoon is barely over 6 minutes, which is an apt amount of time before any one concept gets stale. Clean Sweep is a solid little short, but nothing to write home about. Who the hell writes home about things they watched on TV anyway? Then we get to U.S. Acres. It's based off another, far less successful Jim Davis comic strip about farm animals, which I've read, and, well, it was kind of poorly conceived at first, though it got better later. It even got better when it was brought to television. U.S. Acres is a bit more cartoony and less real-worldy than the Garfield segments, though today's segment is Secrets of the Animated Cartoon, and I don't think U.S. Acres ever got so totally and completely fourth-wall breaking and duck-amuck-like.
We are in a cartoon.
I thought we were in a farm.
Well, this is a cartoon farm. You see, there's a cartoon house, and a cartoon sun, and a cartoon tree, and a cartoon cow, and a Yeesh!
Was that a cartoon joke?
Oh, and U.S. Acres also had musical numbers. They were okay sometimes. I'd be lying if I said I liked U.S. Acres as a kid. I mean, I guess I didn't mind it, but I was much more invested in the Garfield stuff. It was just too much of a disconnect. The stuff I liked about Garfield, namely Garfield's sarcasm and wit, just wasn't in U.S. Acres. So the segment has the pig Orson teaching the duck Wade the tropes of animated comedy.
However, in a cartoon, you don't fall until you realize you've run out of ground. Observe.
I'll get you, worm! Hey, that's not fair!
Now, you notice how there's nothing under him, but since this is a cartoon...
Oh, he won't fall until he notices. I get it. Uh-oh, he noticed.
Again, this is a rare kind of meta not normally seen on this show. Orson takes Wade through the ropes with takes, double takes, spit takes, chase scenes with the paint a hole in the wall gag. I can't actually recall seeing this episode way back in the day, but if I did, I probably would have thought it was incredibly clever. And it is. It's the right kind of clever for a 7-year-old. A first step in a genre deconstruction and spending countless hours editing TV tropes. Which I still don't have a page on, guys. We go back to Garfield for the final segment, How the West Was Lost. For no apparent reason, John, Garfield, and Odie go to a dude ranch where they meet up with a reoccurring character called Cactus Jake. Oh boy. Guys, I've seen Hey Dude on Nickelodeon, and if I learned anything from that show, it's that nothing interesting actually happens at these places. It seems that the ranch has a new owner, some dweeb who's trying to mechanize everything. Cactus Jake is fired when he can't figure the machines out, which leads us to a long string of cowboys don't understand modern society jokes.
Any experience in shoes, Jake?
Oh, I know all about shoeing.
Good. Then you can help that lady.
What can I do for you today, ma'am?
I'd like to try this on, please.
Well, you come to the right place. I'll have to heat this shoe up in the forge and then nail her on. If I heat this up and pound on it some, it'll fit perfect.
Yes, because cowboys don't wear shoes, and the only concept of shoes they have is those for horses. Yeah, none of these jokes make any sense. This isn't some Crocodile Dundee thing where Cactus Jake doesn't get modern technology and convenience. This is him having no common sense whatsoever, and it doesn't work. It's not funny. Eventually, Cactus Jake goes back to the ranch to ask for his job back, and that's when a wild horse starts tearing up the place, and Cactus Jake saves the day. Now, Jake is a reoccurring character, but he's not that reoccurring, so it's not like we care about his plight or anything more than the most superficial level. This is a story where the short running time actually hurts it, as this is the kind of narrative that would actually benefit from a full half hour. And that's the episode. Some good, some weird, some bad. A rather balanced experience. Overall, Garfield and Friends was the Garfield franchise at its peak, when it was at its funniest and highest in quality. And of course it was, at least by my estimate, an important piece in the transition between 80s and 90s animation. So, definitely check it out when you get the chance.
I always keep a bucket of mud just off camera. Doesn't everyone?